Good morning, everybody. Hope you're doing well. Just going to pull up my screen. So I hope everyone is doing well this morning. It's a beautiful Friday morning. I'm hoping more people will hop on because this is definitely going to be a team effort meeting today. So I'm going to give folks a few more minutes before I start. I did hear from Mackenzie. She has meetings until 10 o'clock on Friday, so I know that she'll be arriving a little bit late. I haven't heard from many others though, but as I said, we will kick it off and get as much accomplished as we can today as possible. Our icebreaker for today is why did you decide to be on the advocacy committee? And when you're thinking about the next year coming up, what is one thing that you would like to see yourself doing as part of this committee? As usual, I'll kick it off just because I don't want to put anybody on the spot right off the top. I'm very interested in this work. I do think it's a historic time. I like to bring people together and roll up my sleeves and get things going. And I think that this work that's happening through Vital Communities is incredibly important. I'm looking at what Let's Grow Kids has accomplished. I know they're not the only voice, but it's pretty amazing. And we didn't expect as much to come through New Hampshire as we've seen. So I really want to get out in front of that. I think it's going to be a pivotal year this next year coming up. Good morning, Rebecca. How are you today?
I'm doing okay, thank you.
Great.
I suppose I joined this committee because as I look at the early child care landscape, I think that there need to be a bunch of solutions, and it's an issue that really needs the voices of all of the stakeholders. So I guess I see a group like this where there are voices coming from different areas of the sector, from educators, from business owners, etc. It's just such a that's what we need. You know, we don't, it's so difficult, I think, from a legislative perspective to make things work, and from a community perspective, what we need is all of this blend of kind of voices coming together. So my goal, or what I'm like looking towards doing, it's a big idea, so I'm struggling for words, but one idea I have for next year for like the work that I'm doing on this issue is to look at what a pilot study might look like. That would be probably a privately funded or like a grant funded pilot study, and like identifying what specific things we want to move the needle on and how we're going to fund it. So like my dream is bridging the gap between private and public funding. So having some kind of like stake in the game from employers, and identifying what kind of tax what might make sense, and then what should come from either like general funds or stuff like that. And then like once you decide where the money comes from, it's like, well, and what does it actually go to? That's going to be beneficial to the system that's already in place, because we're not creating a new system, we're just trying to reinforce what already exists. So yeah, I'm inspired by that idea of kind of like blending appropriation sources and then finding specific kind of pulse points where money can make a difference.
It'll be great to work with you on that. That's a great perspective. Yeah, that's exciting. Morning, Anna. How are you?
Morning, I'm good. It's Friday and sunny. This question is more of why am I at this job? I think it's extremely important to have a healthy system, and childcare is a huge piece of a healthy system, and it's a hugely unhealthy piece right now. So yeah, I'm still getting my foot in the door with the job world, and so it's really lovely to make connections, and yeah, I'm grateful to be part of such a powerful team.
Good morning, Sarah.
Good morning. So why this work group? It's because I think that this issue of advocacy and communication and storytelling around this this crisis in our community and this need in our economy and in the lives of kids and families is just so important that we've got to figure out how to advance it. I would really want to figure out how to get people to this table who have the capacity to, I think the vocabulary I'm learning is be influencers around this need and around the strategies that will alleviate the crisis. So it's that I'm sort of a process-oriented person. So the process to get from the crisis we're in to a healthier place for the community interests me, and I think this table can make a difference.
Hello, Brooke.
Good morning, everybody. Brooke Freeland with the Couch Family Foundation, and why I am part of the Advocacy Workgroup. I would say, and why back in the beginning, when this all began, year and a half ago, why we advocated for an advocacy work group as part of just because there's so much advocacy is key to educating people about this topic, and we all touch it and understand kind of the crisis that's unfolding and has been, but a lot of other influencers, to use Sarah's word, decision makers, aren't as aware. It hasn't impacted them personally, or don't see their role in being part of the solution. So I see advocacy as one, a form of education, two, a way of keeping the momentum and the focus on the early childhood sector, the early education care sector, keeping up the momentum, elevating the needs of families and providers, and helping to bring forth solutions. And through advocacy, you ultimately can create some policy change. What I'd love to see next year is bringing more unlikely, we like to call them unlikely allies, to the table. So those who are not necessarily in the early care and education sector, but maybe in the business world, in government, and bring them into the conversation and allow them to be influencers, spokespeople about the importance of investing in early childhood education. So it's not always that we're hearing from the providers. I think we need to hear from the parents, but also those unlikely allies. And so how do we help bring them into the fold and elevate those voices? Yeah, I think that's it. And I had one more point, but it's 8:30 here and it's escaped me.
Hi, Amy, how are you?
Good morning. I think along the lines of what Brooke was saying, I think it is about education and telling the story of not only is it about like the workforce getting more people to work, it's also about the children's education, and not kind of like maybe bringing that back into the conversation again about what high quality early childhood education actually does in the impact of a child's development. It's the return on investment in that, and not forgetting that.
Thanks. Hi, Tracy. Nice to see you.
Good morning, everybody. So for me, advocacy is one of the central mission, part of the mission of the Upper Valley Business Alliance, and and we do it on behalf of the business community in the Upper Valley. But this is also an issue that has been simmering for a long time. It's one that the pandemic shined a light on, but it's certainly not new. In fact, you could almost argue that it's centuries old, because I know, childcare shapes the lives of many families, and particularly women. I know it certainly was a factor for me when my own daughters were young in terms of career choices and paths in life. And just the fact that it's really now something that's a limiting factor for businesses, I think that's causing it to move into the forefront, and it's about time. But that's the other more personal reason that I'm interested in this, is because it would be nice for my own daughters to have more choices and opportunity if childcare wasn't a factor for them, if it was something that was more widespread and affordable and equitable. So
Thank you all for sharing your thoughts. The reason I'm going to be kicking off our committees with this is just to remind us as to why we're here and the work that still needs to be done. And I think that when I came on in August, Andrew did a nice job with all of you in kind of creating big buckets to look at. And the work over the last few months has been kind of doing a deep dive into those and what can we do. And the next year is definitely rolling up our sleeves and actually doing it and making sure that we are lifting every rock and doing everything we can, because it's going to be a pivotal year for sure. And the way that I want to create our new goals coming up through June and the next year is making sure that they are very much so targeted, but also measurable as we're writing them, to make sure that we're doing what we set out to do, and making sure that the goals are very clear to everybody on the committee. And I would also like to see us each take some ownership between meetings as to what we're going to do, instead of we'll just wait till the next meeting and have a next conversation about certain people and what they've done. But everybody on each committee should be thinking about what they're going to do, whether that's connecting with another person and bringing them on board, whether that's doing some research, whether it's connecting the dots or checking in or keeping us up to date on the legislation. I think we need to empower each other to take action over this next year. And although I'm working on goals from June through August, September, I want to keep the big picture in what it is. I don't want to lose momentum over the summer months. So I went through and pulled up our North Star that we created, and the metrics. Sarah gave me some great ideas about a model with each goal. What did we do and how much of it did we do? So some kind of number. How well did we do it? So some kind of percentage, what in that format, and who is better off because of it? Like, who did we impact? So when we're creating our goals, I kind of want to put them in that framework. And I know we're all familiar with the collective impact model work too. So when I clean these up, I'll put that colored graphic from our charter. So we keep that as like the big umbrella for the work that we're doing. And I went in and began, and so what I think is I'd like to do the strategic goal conversation first and then go back to the North Star. Because if we do the North Star first, it might limit where we go with the goals that we want to draft. So we're going to draft some today and then come back at the next meeting and finalize them with the group. And I'll push them out to members in between. So one of the goals that I had for my role was publishing a one-pager, which we did do. And it was based on Carsey School and Kim Vada's earlier work. And we used it in several ways. That was the basis for the presentations or conversations with UBA, the Couch Foundation, and Corporate Council. And along the lines that you were talking about, Rebecca, Sarah, what I'm hearing is an interest in doing some kind of research study that potentially corporate council would support. And I think it might be helpful if we as a group, not today, but determine the key areas of that research that they should potentially look into. Or what are your thoughts about that?
So both Tracy and Tracy, Anna, and where are you? I've just lost you from my screen. Rebecca. And you were working on your walking desk when you were on that corporate council meeting too. We're all present for the corporate council meeting, and that on last Wednesday when JD Chesloff from the Massachusetts Business Roundtable presented on this issue, and he really kept emphasizing the economic argument is the one that had the most resonance with the legislature, and pointed out a couple of good economic impact studies that have been done to create what that what the real economic meaning of early care and education is for a state. And there appeared to be interest if we were to find a way to create a similar type of report for New Hampshire. They would be very much interested in that. And I think if we could come up with a strategy for it, whether it's the Fiscal Policy Institute or whether it's UNH Carsey School or whether it's the Tuck School or Rockefeller Center at Dartmouth. I mean, I could think of 4 potential entities that would have the knowledge, skills, capacity to develop such a report. And I think if we had a strategy that was specific and a commitment from somebody to do it and a price tag on it, we could work with the council to get it funded. And I think they would feel engaged in being part of, with what would be a limited lift for them. And Brooke has just put something in the chat. Yeah, the chamber report. And that was, okay, I didn't realize that they had done it like for every state.
Not for every state, but they'll contract with, you do have to raise money, but they will contract with states to do it in states.
Okay. Okay, so and are they a good provider for this service? Is that
yeah, I mean, they kind of have the formula for the surveys, it's kind of a plug and play with them. So
I would caution one thing about the U.S. Chamber,
Yeah.
and I've done quite a bit with them. But what tends to happen is because the U.S. Chamber, sorry, I don't know what's going on in my video, but because they do, not the foundation, but the U.S. Chamber itself endorses candidates, sometimes that will turn off people. And like every election cycle, I will get a call that will say, something about why are you endorsing this candidate when, and then I have to explain that, the Business Alliance is not part of the US Chamber, even though we are a Chamber of Commerce. I would be leaning towards New Hampshire fiscal policy. I think they're statewide and they're very well respected in New Hampshire. So if we're gonna, put this out to our state reps and legislature, I think that they would be the one that would do something,
Yeah.
and it would, have credibility.
And I think that's a good point, Tracy. I think the New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute already has some of that data. So it's just elevating that too and kind of building off of what they already have. Yeah, I agree that the US Chamber Foundation is very separate from the US Chamber too, and often kind of are on different sides of the aisle. And when we did this report in Texas, and like the economic impact was around 9 billion potential lost in, like business people see that number and like, that's just too big. Like we can't tackle that. And so there was a little bit of a pushback on it too. So it made a big splash, but almost too big of a splash.
Right. I think also Stay Work Play has done some, not exclusively to childcare, but I believe that in their most recent survey, and I have a copy of it someplace, childcare came up. And so that might be another, it may be a task of, taking pieces from different documents and research and putting it together as sources.
So I think that's exactly the process. I think that any strong research hub would undergo with something like this. Yeah, I think, I mean, if this feels right to proceed with, then I guess Joanne, I punt it back to you to say, how do you want to ask for somebody to make an outreach to the Fiscal Policy Institute to find out what they could or would do? Sorry for the background chorus here. No, she's all right. It's a little noisy, but it's okay. Or whether that's something you would think fit into your bailiwick, Joanne, or one of the others of us should sign up and volunteer to pursue.
I think it's something that I could follow up on. I'm familiar with quite a few of the reports, just having reviewed them, pardon me, myself. So I'd be happy to connect with New Hampshire Fiscal Policy. The thing I wrote underneath is just specifically the wants of the study, I think is important to identify before I make calls. And, I'm wondering if we put this together at this meeting, at the next meeting, we flush it out a bit more, and maybe some other folks will be here. And I wouldn't want to reach out unless I was clear on the wants and the scale of the study. I think those are things that they would ask me in order to determine their time frame to do it, and also the cost of what they would, what their rate or their fees would be. So I think I would definitely follow up and just give people time to think about the wants of the study, and that would be an action step for the next meeting.
It sounds good. And then and Brooke has put two other comments in the chat. One one is a reference back to Jess Carson, who is the person who's done the studies that we have worked from, with the whole ECE initiative, the study in that was published in 2018, and the one that's just come out recently with her data. And then Brooke, I think the true cost of quality is a different kind of question, and one that's equally important to ask. But I think that if we were looking at what JD emphasized over and over again to the corporate council, was that as important as families are and as important as early childhood development is, what matters when it comes to the big money pictures is the impact on the economy. It's still, it sort of gets back to that, to that Bill Clinton line about it's the economy, stupid. It's the,
Yeah.
no matter what you think of either the form of the message or the deliverer of the message is still the same. It is about the economy. So that was sort of what got hooked onto, although we still do need true cost of quality information too.
Right. And I guess I'd add to, there's kind of two strands of data and information to help make the case. And I would say the Children's Funding Project is working with New Futures around some fiscal mapping. I know, which will just kind of outline what public dollars are coming into the system and kind of identifying the dollars that are coming in versus the actual costs and kind of the gap between what we have and what we need. And I think that we can, if we get someone from New Futures on this call again, it's worth checking in on them and kind of the status of that work, because I think that'll help inform some of the fiscal impact, the economic impacts. And then we did something at the Couch Family Foundation, I mean, it's probably 5 or 6 years ago, with Jess Carson, did a study kind of looking at the largest employers in the Upper Valley and surveying their employees around their childcare needs. So even doing something, kind of a community-wide cultural survey to better understand the childcare needs of both those employed and not employed, I think would be really valuable. If we can get at, we have X% of people who are not entering the workforce because they can't find childcare, I think that would be really valuable data, because that's kind of the question I hear a lot as well. How many people aren't in the workforce that could be in the workforce when we can't when we have unfilled, positions that we can't fill. And I see Mackenzie has her hand up, so.
Hey, good morning. How are you, Mackenzie?
Morning, everyone. Sorry, I'm habitually late to this meeting. I've got 2 meetings that happened before this somehow on a Friday. But wanted to let you all know, apologies for entering the conversation late. We held a lunch and learn with the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston this past Wednesday with Beth Mattingly, who is she was the director of research on vulnerable families at the Carsey School of Public Policy, but moved on to the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston a few years back. And she came and talked to some key members of our House leadership, Senate leadership, and the Special Committee on Childcare. And she shared some research, which I'm happy to share with you all. One of the most impactful statistics that came out of her presentation was this stat about how many New Hampshire moms are not working because of the lack of access to childcare. And I know that it will not surprise you all to hear that that number is 93%. 93% of moms who are not working because they don't have access to childcare. And of course, her statistic looks specifically at moms with young kids. There's, some quirks about that number, but basically 93% due to lack of access of childcare. So Brooke, when you were talking about, that's statewide, that's research that the Fed did on their own. And just to echo, like, if we're talking about needing researchers, I think the Fed is a really interesting entity because it's quasi-governmental. It's confusing enough that people pay attention, and it's a nonprofit organization whose governing members are federal employees. So excuse me. I just think it's really interesting. So we should tap into the Federal Reserve Bank more often if we're not already. And Sarah and Beth still work very closely with Jess Carson. And I'm, again, happy to pass along the presentation that Beth shared.
Now, is that different from the presentation that Amy just put in the chat? Or is that the same one?
That's it. Oh my goodness. Yes, that's it.
Don't you like instant gratification on this committee? There's always somebody who knows something.
Yeah. So slide 7 is the one that shows around New England moms with kids, but the statistic for New Hampshire moms is 93%. So
Thank you for that.
Sure
Both
thing.
of you. Appreciate it. What we are doing, Mackenzie, at this meeting is we are trying to think about what steps we have taken, but build on that using metrics for the next set of goals that we want to put together as an advocacy group. And we were just talking about, and it seems there's wide interest and support for some type of research study. And we began to brainstorm the who, and then the next meeting we'll spend more time on like the what should be part of that study. And then I'll follow up with whatever agency or institution that we think would be a good start in regard to the scope and cost and timeline and things like that. So that was very helpful. What
Can I do-
groups? Oh, go
Can I
ahead.
do a little brain dump on that before I forget?
Yeah.
Just, so I was thinking, when we were thinking of groups and not chambers, thinking of associations. And this comes from like car dealerships that were helping out with COVID, delivering supplies, and they're all behind early childhood, and some of them are female, owned. And so just like the associations, there's like nursing, there's realtors, there's all these different groups, hotels. The other question I think I just want to keep in there when you were talking about pilot, Rebecca was talking about pilots earlier, and I'm not sure what the research question is, but to kind of keep an eye on what that small pilot going on in Coos County about understanding the cost of care, not only the cost of quality, but the cost of delivering to families, and then maximizing the scholarship dollars, because it seems like there's a lot of scholarship dollars left on the table every year. And with the potential switch to enrollment-based billing, we want to see the effects of that, like the real effects of that investment. And then make sure that people are maximizing that. And then how much does it cost to deliver quality care? So it's a microcosm. It's only going to be 2 or 3 centers, but I think it's a important project to keep track of. Sorry.
Thanks. When we think about other groups, we've mentioned businesses, we mentioned kind of big ideas. Are there specific targeted groups that we should put a lot of effort into getting them on board and part of these conversations?
The New Hampshire Business Industry Association, childcare it's the statewide chamber of commerce, and all of the other associations they are part of the BIA. And in fact, the BIA has usually a couple of meetings every legislative session. First at the beginning, where they bring all of the statewide associations together, and then they had one at crossover. I typically attend those. It's usually chambers and things like the Auto Dealers Association and the Restaurant and Lodging Association, New Hampshire Retail Association. There's one for, I forget what their name is. There's the contractors, home builders, there's the ones for trucking but anyways, but definitely childcare came up at both of those meetings, and they're all carefully watching legislation. So I think, the BIA, it would be the one that you'd want to bring in. And as it happens, Mike Skelton, the president, has a couple of young children himself. So this is something that's, he's very, very aware of.
Tracy, what's the I stand for again, please?
Business Industry Association.
And actually, Tracy, to add on that, I think that's a great point. And I mistyped in the chat. I think we originally, when this group started, we were working with Sean Mulholland about getting language in the municipal association's agenda around investing in access to childcare. But it would be also great to tap into the BIA, New Hampshire BIA, to try to get childcare on their policy agenda, and maybe it is, but if it isn't, if we could open up that, I mean, that would be a good initial ask of
I'm
them.
pretty sure about 3 months ago, when I was talking with Tom Weber, who was going to originally be the presenter for the corporate council, that he mentioned that he had been talking with the BIA. He was talking with 2 different groups in New Hampshire in addition to the Upper Valley. And I was pretty sure he mentioned some sort of a conversation he'd had with the BIA. And then when I was talking with JD Chesloff and prep for this past week, and I mentioned, you know, when I said to him, do you think that's a place to connect with or tap into? And his answer was absolutely, talk to the BIA.
Oh, yeah, and when Sean and I went to testify on the bill that he proposed, I was able to get BIA support.
Oh,
They're-
good.
Yeah, and all of the other chambers in the state as well. They all signed on to supporting that bill.
That's huge. Is there a connection that you could make, Tracy? Or how would you suggest we go about doing that?
Yeah, no, I can definitely make that connection. Just let me know exactly what we're looking for. Of course, you know, this legislative session is starting to wrap up, but like I said, childcare is definitely on the BIA's list of priorities.
So group, what would be?
Amy, you are truly everywhere. I'm just looking at now you and La Montagne also. Okay, so sorry, Joanne, go ahead.
Oh, that's about right. So the specific goal of connecting with New Hampshire BIA, where do they fit in with the current work that's happening? What would be the best place for them so that we're clear in the ask of making this connection? Would they be part of the advocacy group? What do you picture them doing?
No, they wouldn't be part of the advocacy group, but what they would do is they would advocate for legislation that
Okay.
we were hoping for.
Right.
What I would probably do is get us on their radar by talking with them about our efforts to be a broader convening group for this region that is inclusive of their business interests as well as other stakeholder cohorts. And I would maybe mention our interest in working from economic data as part of our educational advocacy, and you know, ask them how they've approached that, what they've done about it, what they have, whether they would give us any advice about that. Just sort of come to them, sort of sharing a little thinking, and just sort of have them be aware that we exist and what we're trying to work forward on right now. That would be my thought.
Well, we can perhaps invite Dave Juvet, their lobbyist, to come and maybe sit in on a meeting, and perhaps Mike as well, Mike Skelton.
So Dave was, I saw him at when Dartmouth Health did their gathering back in December down at St. Anselm's. He was present at it when there was a panel on child care, the big panel on child care that happened at that meeting. He sat in on. He was one of the attendees who went to that room during that session.
Mhm.
So and it was, you know, presenting and Carolyn Isabel from DH was the facilitator for that panel. So
So
yeah, So I
Yeah.
know it's on his radar.
And once again, when we come back, I'll begin to do the metric part of it, but I kind of wanted to get the big ideas today as far as what people wanted to focus on, and kind of that, we need to up our game a bit in advocacy. So what might that look like together as a team doing that work? We talked about other
Can
groups.
can I just jump in with one other idea? And I don't know, I'm just kind of curious if JD Chesloff brought it up yesterday about initiative that Massachusetts is part of, which is the Best Place for Working Parents, which is kind of like a public awareness campaign about family-friendly workplace policies that support parents with young children, and kind of creating awareness about that. So I don't know if that's something he brought up, but another strategy to engage business community
Yeah.
in the conversation.
He did not bring it up, Brooke, and we had distributed material on that to the corporate council 6 months ago. It's something we can think about as a strand to maybe go back to, but in some ways, I'm almost concerned that it gets to be sort of a bypass for companies now. Well, if they do that, they don't have to worry about the messiness of the ECE needs.
Yeah.
So, and he didn't happen to mention it this past week, although I knew from you about his role with that.
Okay. All right. No, good. That's a good point. Just seeing if it came up.
The other thing is Senate Bill 237 in New Hampshire ended up not moving forward, but that was because most of the specific elements of it have ended up in the governor's budget. And then getting the budget passed with those things remaining in the budget is something that we need to be aware of. And then being able to understand from other advocacy groups in the state what the push will be for next year, what the actual legislative, what the homework will be about building into the budget for the next time around, and other freestanding legislation that's needed because of stuff that doesn't get addressed through the budget process. And in the meantime, by the way, has everybody heard that the Vermont legislature came to an agreement on S56 on the childcare bill, that the House agreed to go along with the Senate's version of a payroll tax, which, by the way, was the business community's recommendation for how to fund it all along. It was the business community that proposed the payroll tax strategy. And with the businesses paying 3/4 of the 0.44% tax, and employees paying the other 1/4%. And what the Senate conceded was not taking away the child tax credit, that the state level child tax credit that had been put in last year. So, so Vermont, my personal feeling about Vermont is that they came to a really good place. The governor is expected to veto it because he didn't want the tax, but it looks like there are enough votes in both chambers to override his veto on it. So there may be, maybe major things ahead in Vermont, but then New Hampshire, I think we won't know for a bit how things are shaking out. And Tracy's just Mackenzie's put something in the chat about the budget, and Tracy's put stuff in about Senate Bill 221. And I'll stop talking.
Tracy, I copied and downloaded your testimony, so thank you for adding that. Mackenzie, do you want to talk a little bit about what you put in the chat?
Yeah, sure. So just a quick budget update in terms of where they're at in the process. The Senate Finance Committee currently has the House versions of the budget, and in it are included all the provisions of Senate Bill 237. The sort of childcare coalition that works statewide is advocating on, fully funding all the provisions of Senate Bill 237. And right now we feel really confident, really good about that. They'll likely finish deliberating by the end of next week with the full Senate to wrap up the budget discussions. They think by May 23rd, but that's a personal preference, not an actual deadline they've been given. So really they have until June 8th to make some final, or that's when everything needs to be wrapped up. So really probably by May 30th is when the Senate needs to be wrapped up with the budget. And then depending on, what the difference is between the House and Senate budget, we may go to committee of conference, and then we still need to get it up to the governor's desk. But I think that I don't want to put all my eggs in one basket, but I think we're feeling really good about the provisions of Senate Bill 237. And I feel strongly that the change to enrollment-based billing will happen and be funded.
Are there action steps that we can take to support that work, or is it outside of our hands, or what are about that?
No, I mean, not outside of your hands. So right now, the members of the Senate Finance Committee are hearing from constituents about what getting public comment about what should be included in that budget. And so I know there are, a couple grassroots organizations who are doing emailing, that kind of thing. Moms Rising has one now specifically around Mother's Day and what moms need in the budget. So ours is childcare and maternal health focused, but I'm sure that New Futures is doing one specific to childcare, Early Learning New Hampshire, those types of folks. But I can pop, when I stop talking my head off, I'll pop some links in the chat for places you could take action, or I can give you the list of the Senate Finance Committee members, and you're welcome to just email them yourself and give them your 2 cents.
That would be fantastic. That's exactly what we're trying to get into and start more of.
And Mackenzie, could I ask that you also share with us what the piece is that you're putting out from Moms Rising? So we have your language too. And I would add one more thing. I was at a different meeting yesterday with Michelle Merritt, who is the executive director of New Futures, at the table. And she was talking about, just talk about the sophistication of legislative advocacy. They have a computer process of geocaching in which they can identify all of the people who live close to each member of the Finance Committee, and they can tap all of those people about the issue and ask them to talk to their neighbor, literally their physical neighbor, the Finance Committee person. And they're doing this process from New Futures. It's pretty remarkable.
So while Mackenzie is adding that info to the chat, I'm going to close that. And so goal 3 is the goal that we had about being a centralized online communication platform. And, the listserv has been expanded and updated. The website is now updated. I think I'm imagining us moving forward to be talking more about the platform in regard to connecting with what Mackenzie is saying, that maybe we could also push out information about legislation that's coming up, and please support it, and who to connect with. But New Futures has done a really good job with that. I know it's been really simple for me, the way that they've put their information out, that I've pushed through the ECE listserv. So I don't want to be redundant in having our group simply, doing the same thing that New Futures is doing. And yet I don't feel as though there's a specific group like there was with Let's Grow Kids, that I just knew that, and I know they weren't the voices for everyone, but they were definitely the powerhouse in getting information into people's hands and making it really simple to advocate or click or, tweak a letter, which also New Futures has been doing recently. So how do you see the advocacy work group helping to be that communication platform through this initiative? Are we doing that successfully? I mean, we could calculate the number of things we've pushed out. We could measure the type of things that we've pushed out. We know that the listserv is growing. I didn't know if this group could see a more effective use of that centralized communication platform for E ECE?
What I can't tell is if we're just talking to ourselves. So it's not how much we're putting out, it's who's reading them.
I was just gonna ask if there's a way to check clicks on that.
We had for the week of the young child Facebook and Instagram posts, we had data on that, and it was I don't know what the numbers are off the top of my head, and I'm not on my computer today, so I can't pull it up right now. We can definitely reach a larger audience, but that was also just going to the vital communities audience. I'm not sure if there's a way to measure clicks on the listserv.
Yeah, that's something we can definitely look into.
Because I think determining how much effort we and attention we should put to this really would be dependent, to me anyway, on who's using it and how.
We can see who is subscribed to the listserv.
I
I
think
think
only
it's-
it's the administrator of the listserv can see the clicks. Probably.
which is me. I'm the administrator.
Yeah, if you could look into that.
Yeah,
between
definitely.
meetings, that would be super helpful. Be very interested to see. When we approached Daybreak about Week of the Young Child, why did they respond that they wouldn't add that information? Because I see information like that every morning when I read it. Was there a barrier that we can overcome?
They told me it was because there was no event.
So if it's something like the Lebanon on the Green event we
Yes.
talked about, then it would be, okay,
Yes.
that's helpful. Thank you. For Week of the Young Child, we kind of did a small step in that direction. I think as advocacy committee, we talked about having a much bigger reach. And as we just mentioned, some kind of threshold event, a kickoff event for that week. You know, Sean was great, the manager from Enfield, also through Hanover. And Tracy, thank you for those connections. I would like to expand it and make it more statewide. I talked a bit with Jackie Berman, with you, Amy, about the kind of Week of the Young Child and some ideas that she had, but I've contacted her in between and haven't gotten back. And you know, she was a person that we talked about as key with this work, and I really feel like making that connection with her to know what's going on in New Hampshire would be really helpful again, if we could do that. Sarah, were you going to add some thoughts? No. I would like to ask this group, what can we do as far as advocacy for the Week of the Young Child that we didn't do this year, that falls along the lines of what did we do? Anybody better off because of it? You know, how well did we do it? We did talk about some kind of kickoff event. Talked about more towns, cities, Upper Valley, and then, you know, expand into New Hampshire. What other thoughts do you have about that week?
I have a thought.
Great.
So if this is April of next year, we'll be in the middle, or we'll just have gone through crossover, which means our bills will have like flipped bodies. And so depending on what our legislative priorities look like for next year, you could potentially write an outreach with the theme of the Week of the Young Child and tie it to your policy priority and send it to whichever relevant, you know, committee or whatever, whomever might be working on it. And you could do a social media campaign around that. And you could build in the earned media piece.
Excellent. When you say earned media piece, What are you picturing?
So we could do, we could plant some letters to the editor from you all. We could see if we could get you on, what is it called? Fred Coker, his little segment on WMUR that he does every like weekend. We could try to get you on a podcast with In Depth New Hampshire. And I know that man's name, but it's just not coming to me. So just thinking about like the broad array of ways that you can get your message out there. That's not like traditional, you know, having someone write an op-ed or having someone write a piece for you. How can you take the action? And you know what else is great too? Recently, you all are thinking about the business angle of this, and the New Hampshire Business Review has been fantastic talking about childcare lately. And so I would like definitely implore you to think about them too when you're thinking about media, like in that business lens.
Those are all wonderful ideas. Thank you.
Mhm. Sure.
I'm excited about that already. I know it's a little early, but this is the kind of conversation I was hoping we would have today. So I'm just grateful that I get goosebumps when I'm happy, and I just think it's great because this is that elevation that I was hoping that we would get to. We started this year, but I know that there's more that we can do together. So that's great. Communicate findings. So we are talking about the community and municipal leaders. I want to engage Sean, who is connected with a lot of folks, to see he has expressed to me that he's reached out, but it's not necessarily an interest in it. And I'm curious as to why it's not an interest in some of these other cities and towns when he is seeing it so clearly. Can we educate? We talked earlier about education as being a big part of this advocacy. Knock on a few doors, expand. They must be impacted. So, you know, whether it's the fingerprinting piece he was frustrated he couldn't get through, or just the conversations and building it as a larger Upper Valley issue, I think is really important. And so I'm going to lean on him a bit to help us make some connections. And then through UVBA, also connecting with businesses. We just had the conversation with corporate counsel. And Anna, who is the person that you connected with me this morning? Lindsay
Hansen is, I believe, someone else in this group might know better than I do, but I believe she took over for Deli at Scan.
Deli, she's actually in the process of hiring someone new for
Okay.
Deli's role. So I think, but she told me the other day that she like was on a second interview with someone. So hopefully someone will be in that role soon.
So do you know what her background is, or who she
Sorry,
is?
Lindsay Hansen is I don't know her title, but she works for Save the Children Action Network.
She's the senior director of.
Yep, I think you're right. And she, her catchment area is the whole Eastern Seaboard down to like Louisiana.
She lives in Hopkinton.
She does, yeah. One other thing I was thinking about, which could be an interesting moment for you all next year, and Amy, you may be able to talk a little bit better about this piece than I am, because this isn't one of Moms Rising's legislative priorities this year, but Senate Bill 170, which is Jen Legier is really spearheading that bill, which I believe creates the ability to have an offsite childcare center with the intention of sort of running these like remote field childcares. And I think there's an interesting business angle there. Like if a business has a space that isn't being used, could a childcare center come in and, you know, operate a small classroom for those employees at that business? But again, that may be out of my, that's a little bit out of my wheelhouse. So curious about what others think about, you know, that piece of legislation and the business angle there.
Yeah, it's creating a space and licensing for it. That would be basically like a small or a large family childcare or small, very small business. The thing about micro centers is that what we know about sustainability, they would need to be embedded in a corporate atmosphere in order to carry all the overhead, because it really takes 70 to 100 children to break even. It takes like 85 children to break even, to run a thriving, sustainable business, based on the current conditions. So we'll see. It'll be very interesting, because we did run into a few people. I had a couple actually, one in not in Coast, but Upper Grafton, and then one in the Lev area that wanted to do something in a church and couldn't, because they would have to go by regular licensing rules and get all of the qualifications and everything needed. So if someone wanted to take 12 kids in a church, and because they rent and they can't have a childcare in their home, they could do it off site at a place that would absorb some of the overhead costs. So it just makes a space. I think it'll be interesting.
Speaking of legislation, Anna's been creating this chart. Relative to children in regard to timeframes and things like that. So, I was hoping that we could use this to say, okay, in this time frame, what do we want to get behind? What action steps are we going to take? And be aware of it and keep the momentum going, rather than just kind of mentioning something in a meeting and then no one really does anything about it, because we're not aware of the time frame or we don't have the tools to immediately advocate. So I'd like to build on our toolbox of what we can do to advocate as a group, and making it as simple for other people to do it as possible. And then, talking about using the listserv, trying to get this information out, expanding the listserv out. I'd love to connect with Let's Grow Kids to see what strategies they used to expand and get so many people involved that perhaps we could do something in the Upper Valley along those lines. They've done it successfully. So you want to reach out and just ask them what strategies they used for their effective communication, and asking for people to take action. And so we will be working off of this spreadsheet and keeping everyone up to date. And we'll add links to the site. And I'm not sure if these are live or not. And there's also a tab for Vermont coming up through as well. So I think we can take some more steps. Other thoughts and ideas about legislative involvement that we can do more efficient and effective advocacy?
I can help connect dots, which is something that I haven't been here to help do more. So if it's helpful, Anna, I can always share like the policies that I'm seeing come up, or that I'm hearing like our other partners talk about, if it's helpful. We use a tool called Fast Democracy to help us find like all the bills related to early childhood. And as the organization who sponsors the Moms Caucus, I also have like a stake in making sure that I know far too much about legislative things. But I also popped in the chat. I thought it'd be interesting to see, if depending again what the legislation looks like next year, could you all pull together like an early childhood advocacy day for folks? It could even be virtual. Doesn't have to be a big splashy thing, but it could be a way to bring voices together in the area to kind of amplify your message. And that's another thing too, is like, what is the message? Is it that you all are going to agree on a message, or is it that we bring our different perspectives?
I would love to see this group agree on some specific messages. I think it's more powerful. People can digest it better. When I look at groups like the Corporate Council, they say, yeah, we get the problem. We get there are all kinds of parts to it. Like, just tell us something specific. And so if we have a defined message we'd have to figure out what the timing on an advocacy day could be. But when you think about, getting turned down by daybreak because there wasn't an event, an event becomes the maypole around which everything else can dance. Then let's think about it. Normally I would have been the first one to shrug my shoulders and say, "Ugh, don't," like an advocacy day, but I'm coming to appreciate what the value of creating a marker like that can be. It's not in necessarily even in the event itself, it's in what spins off from it.
Anna and others that attended the event in New Hampshire that Elizabeth brought children to, was that in November?
Well, that was in January.
Is
Yeah,
there, sorry, is there a pivotal time to hold an event? Make it the most-
January.
Okay.
Unfortunately, well, because the way our legislative session kind of works out is you could plan to have one before March, right? And just hope that the committees that you're hoping to influence haven't heard your bill already, right? That pivotal moment is getting in front of members who haven't had a hearing for your bill yet. And so that can happen anytime between January and March. And unfortunately, New Hampshire in January is pretty unpredictable. So it's something that we often butt up against as being sort of a pain in the what. But the earlier, the better.
And Mackenzie, do you know if another New Hampshire, I'll call it summit for lack of the better word, is going to be happening? So why would we reinvent the wheel if we could maybe put our energy into something that's already going to happen, but get more people in the Upper Valley at that table talking to the right people, storytelling, as Sarah talked about in the beginning of this meeting, and be more of a advocate for that day rather than doing something separate.
I think great point, Joanne. Like, why reinvent the wheel? I think it could be a both and though, right? Because the work that you all are doing in the Upper Valley is different than the work happening at the state level. And you have so I'm not saying maybe not on the same scale, but if there's a way that you could bring like your group's lens, because it is a specific lens to the advocacy work, and maybe so I imagine that there will be another advocacy day put on by, New Futures Moms Rising, because we've sort of been working towards this 10-year visioning of childcare. I can't imagine that we'll stop, but I wonder, is there a way then that we could like geographically break out, or like what are the ways that the regions can sort of bring the uniqueness of their regions to the conversation? Like, I just don't want you to lose that thread by participating in a statewide messaging. So I think yes, and like we want to be really intentional about what that looks like. I realize that was a very vague thing to say, but I think you have power in your region.
This is the kind of perspective we need help with, Mackenzie, and I think I would agree with you completely.
I'm here.
And we're glad.
What about if there's a week of events in January where different geographical regions have different pop-up community conversations, but it looks different based on the fabric of that geographical area. So, a lot of communities are very connected to schools. And so having an event within a school brings people together because it's often considered to be a safe space for everyone. But renting out spaces in schools, and usually I know in our district the cost for a nonprofit is less than something else. Amy, what do you have? What are your thoughts?
I was just thinking about the Spark, what used to be the Spark team. And they would go to other people's events rather than try to gather people to them. They had their banners, they had their table, they had their flyers, they had people, like staffed people behind the table that weren't just like volunteers. They were people that knew what and who the message needed to go to. And they would show up and spread the message and they had a presentation built so they could be part of the automotive association's annual event, and they would go and do their 5-minute long elevator pitch, but they had all the promotional materials made. And the message was the bedrock of New Hampshire, so that children were what we build our future on. That was kind of their message, which is very general. Could be for healthcare, it could be for early childhood, it could be for childcare. It'd be nice to have childcare specific for a change, but something like that makes me think of that, because I would go to events and they would be there.
So part of the advocacy team would go to some of these events? Is that what you're suggesting?
I don't know, like the ECEA could even potentially supply people with a stipend if they knew the message, and it would be nice to have volunteers, or just get us a gas stipend or something to show up. I'm trying to think of what the materials included. And they would strategize where they would be. They wouldn't go everywhere, but they would strategize where to be.
And what was their link to know where to be?
I just popped in the chat. I was curious if anybody felt like the Alliance for Early Success and their region leads were a sort of stand-in for that, Amy?
I just called the Alliance. I didn't know that was for Alliance for Early Success. No. I mean, there's no real action. There's an agreed upon, it could be a potential vehicle for a statewide campaign, but they don't have a campaign. They don't have a message or anything. I mean, what they're trying to do is coordinate efforts from region to region, but
And Anna wrote, what has Matt Levin's group been doing? Does anybody know?
I believe they do direct policy work. So they actually show up at hearings and talk to legislators and things like that.
And wouldn't we want to know what they're doing so we can show up as well? Is that grassroots group, or is that a different group?
Matt Levin? Matt Levin's in Vermont. That's the Vermont. Oh boy, there's lots of C's and lots of E's. VCECE? B?
Is Vermont Early Childhood Advocacy Alliance.
Oh, there's an A. Oh, there's A's. VECAA.
Right. I think he is kind of more in the state house, and then showing up. He must have touchstones that he's, like kind of getting direction from or information from. I just don't know where they are. He and I were both showing up for a paid family and medical leave kind of coalition, and the work that I saw him do through that was very focused on having those conversations with legislators.
You're talking about the Vermont Alliance for I never get their name right, for child advocacy. Yeah, right. It's Matt Levin's group. Okay, yeah. So what they are, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating stuff that you've already said, Rebecca. What they are is truly an alliance around any kind of issue related to children in the state of Vermont, and they bring together groups that are working on all of these different issues. They end up identifying which are the things that they think are most important for any particular year, and then different groups take the lead. So in the case of ECE, it's obviously been Let's Grow Kids. In the case of, something like paid family leave, it would be another one of the coalitions. And in the case of, preschool lunches, it was Hunger Free Vermont that took the lead on that, but they all come together at that one table, and then everybody agrees to support each other's stuff and then not compete for the dollars about it, not let the legislature put them in the position of saying, well, you shouldn't fund food because you should be funding childcare. But it's like, you need to fund each of these things, and everyone speaks up in favor of each other's things. So that's how they've worked. Matt is interested in what we're doing from the perspective of the geographic basis of it, and both sees where being connected to that association could be helpful to us in terms of some of the for some of the skills and knowledge and staffing time they have. And on the other hand, feels that this group could be supportive, as a regional voice around any of the issues that we're caring about on the Vermont side. Does that help at all and is that hopefully doesn't contradict anything that Rebecca was saying, or can be additive to what she already has experienced?
Yes. Mackenzie, what's the New Hampshire grassroots group? I think, do you attend those? Yeah.
Yeah, there's a
understand-
sort of 10-year larger childcare table that meets on Thursday afternoons at 3. And then there are 2 meetings that happen before this meeting at 9 and 9:30 on communications and grassroots strategy.
So I try to attend the Thursday ones when I can. But I'm trying to figure out, and it'd be great if you could help me with the link of linking what's happening there with the work here,
Sure.
because what that might look like.
Yeah, I'll say that largely that grassroots table on Thursdays has focused on Senate Bill 237 and the grassroots tactics around it. And so the lunch and learn that I mentioned earlier today was kind of a product of us thinking about that. We also did a Crullers childcare and coffee event with legislators a couple weeks back, where we had donuts and we played that animated video that I think I shared with you all about the childcare scholarship system. So really it's around the grassroots tactics of Senate Bill 237 seems to be the main, sort of driver of that table right now. But now we're talking in art installations in Eagle Square in Concord with some of the coloring pages that some of you all may have seen that say fun childcare on them. They're going to blow that up actually and put it in Eagle Square, which is very exciting. And then perhaps a celebration. And I know Moms Rising will be, when we win, we'll be celebrating. So there's that too, but really largely focusing around the tactics of that bill right now. And then I imagine when we wrap up, we'll start to think about what implementation of that bill looks like, and then next steps for legislation for next year.
Would you be that link for us, that if there are places we should show up, or kind of connecting back with what Amy was talking about, the spark idea, if there are places that we should show up and have our little bit of, hey, here's what's happening in the Upper Valley and here's what we're trying to do, or if we show up and help support that work, because truly what happens on the state level is going to have the most impact on what's going to happen in the Upper Valley, right? So we need to have that big picture. That would be fantastic, because I do attend those and I'm interested, but I'm not quite sure how to hop in or how to make that connection. So
yeah,
that,
I'll make that link for you for sure. And I'll continue to think about ways that we can amplify your geographic spark.
that would be great. Okay. Any other big idea for this committee that we didn't talk about that you think is really important to add to our goals that we can measure, but we can somehow connect back with how we are being relevant and how we are having a positive impact in moving this forward? That we
I
can
think Joanne, you had mentioned kind of clarifying our statements or our asks or our mission. And I think if we can do that and in the next, like, come to the next meeting prepared to do that, that will help us a lot guiding what we do, because conversations like this are so sprawling and we want to be concise in our actions and also tapping into the things that this group is uniquely poised to do. And so I'm wondering if that is being in touch kind of more closely than if we were focusing specifically on like drafting legislation or something like that. And I'm wondering if we can somehow use our community connections and like get information that will guide something that a future goal that may be like that pilot study, you know.
Do you have thoughts about other ideas besides the pilot study when you're talking about the community? I love that idea. I just wondered if you have something else in mind already that you're thinking of.
I guess I'm thinking of like, I guess mostly what I'm thinking of is like staying up to date on what is going to be supportive in this environment for early childhood educators, and also having a method of maybe kind of like cataloging that information so that if we're in a position where we're looking at drafting a program or we are showing up to a new futures meeting where they are drafting, you know, statewide legislation, we can say, well, you know, there are a broad range of needs in our area, but we can speak to each of them without confusing ourselves.
That makes sense.
I wonder too, thank you, Rebecca, for saying, you know, listening to providers, because solving a problem that is relevant to them would be important. That our event a week from today, actually next Saturday, we are having a retreat, the early childhood directors retreat. And we're hoping to draw some of those things out there. Not only identifying their needs and their gaps, but potentially what I'm really going to ask them is, what can they outsource? What are they doing now that they can take off their plate? And if they had, like, without barrier, what would that be? And then we may have something there that to move on. It may not be this committee, but it may be another committee. That could be very relevant for them and potentially influence sustainability just until they get stable. We're at that point. We're just trying to sustain until they get stable. They are struggling really hard, and I hope we can identify some of those things that will bring a little bit of hope back to their lives so they can maintain. Our directors are exhausted as well as staff.
Amy, can I ask a quick question? That I'm just wondering, has your group thought at all or talked at all about what the effect of the RFPs with ARPA-D dollars will have on the region and what that looks like?
Honestly, what we learned last fall from this group is they are so exhausted, the nonprofits, they can't even write grants.
And I did read that recent report by Carsey that shows the inequities of the region not receiving the funding in similar ways of the rest of the state. So
so that's one of the things, like, can we outsource the grant writing? Can we outsource some things so that they can participate more in those?
Right.
The ECEA, in partnership with Boys and Girls Clubs, did respond to the RFP for the workforce recruitment and retention. And my hearing is that they're going to be releasing that decision in the next weeks. I know they are trying their best to get it on the Governor Council meeting for June. So, I mean, they're aware of there's all this stuff they're aware of, but they are in survival mode day to day that they do not, like GSQ is so far, I mean, Jen Laguerre is putting the cost to that, but it's not just the cost. It's like they don't have the mental capacity to even engage it. So
Thank you. That's helpful. I hope that with with your RFP, when you get it, knock on all the things that we can, maybe you could hire a grant writer for them all.
We're actually doing that now.
Good.
We do have someone that is deployed to support grant writing. But it's still like, when are they going to do it? It's like they're grocery shopping on the weekends for the center, trying to find affordable deals because their budgets have not gone up, but the food prices and the supply prices are out of control. It's just very, very, very little time. So she's trying to get into the center. She's written a couple of grants, small grants. But yeah, we're working on it.
And I can't help but think with Rebecca's hat on the co-op, if we couldn't be innovative in regard to groceries, food costs for ECE centers, nutrition.
I was just
Right.
thinking about this, Joanne, especially as like so many families are falling off of SNAP right now. I wonder, I just had a thought, this is random, but like folks have heard of these boxes that you get from like a crop share, farm share. And I imagine they must be semi-popular in your region. But I wonder, could we work with local farms to provide fresh fruits and vegetables to childcare? Because I've heard that they are actually quite reasonable in terms of the cost. I'm sorry, that was such a random thought, but
No, you're the right folks here, Anna. Go ahead.
So this is actually something that Vital Communities, a few of my coworkers and I have been exploring for the last month or so. And we have a farm to school staff member at Vital Communities, and he runs some mini grants, and I think it was more than half of the applicants for this year's grants were ECE centers. And some of them were to put in gardens, and some of them were for CSA shares. And there are a lot of points to this. I could talk for 5 hours about this. But right now, what we're mainly looking at is the CACFP, which stands for something I can't remember, but it's basically subsidy for meal programs, and it's consistently funding less than half of an ECE center's meal program, and the rest of that money is coming out of the budget, in the parents' pockets. So I've been in contact with Keely Agan, who works for Vermont Hunger Solutions out of the Burlington area, and she just did a recent report on what a dream meal program would be for ECE centers, what is working, what isn't working. The 3 main challenges they're running into: paperwork, time that's being put into it, and what was the other one? Money, I think. And some of the dream items were, we would love to hire someone that is just a meal program manager. This person would go out and buy groceries and bring them back. And in one of the studies, there was a center in Springfield, Vermont, that was having to drive all the way to Claremont to get groceries every week because they were too expensive in Vermont. So something we're looking at is, if anyone's familiar with the Everyone Eats model, it's funding went into restaurants to create bulk prepared meals and then deliver them to distribution sites and give them out for free. So, and that just ended. And we actually have on our Vital Communities staff the person who is the head of that in the Upper Valley. So they already have the whole network of restaurants that are totally capable and willing to, and actually relied on that funding to stay in business throughout COVID to make these meals and deliver them. So like, bam, there we go. We're exploring the requirements for the kinds of food that kids would need, and it would probably be less food than adults. There are requirements on the amount of food, ounces that each meal had to be. So yeah, I can definitely keep everyone up to date on that if you would like. Yeah, and Rebecca, there was talk of getting the co-op involved in it too.
Sure. Yeah, feel free to loop me in, and I'd love to see that report too.
Yes,
And then-
I will send that.
Thank you. In terms of like playing the long game, there was a farm to school bill in New Hampshire that kind of got tabled, not expedient to legislate, and we're rewriting it this summer. And an opportunity might be including ECE centers and essentially what would be like subsidized way to buy local food. It's not going to help in terms of like labor and like time that it takes to put those, you know, like making sure you have the right things on hand and stuff like that. But everything is on the table when we're writing it. So I'll certainly like bring it to the conversation, and it would, I mean, if it were similar to what we had proposed in the past, there would be like about $3,600 per center, or if we base it on admission, that might be more equitable of reimbursements available for purchasing through like a local apple orchard or something like that.
And I'll argue that if you look at childcare scholarship families, which again, it's an equity issue, but if you look at the number of children who are enrolled in this childcare scholarship program, you could potentially pull that funding from TANF. So
What's TANF?
Temporary assistance in
Oh,
needy.
right.
Yep.
Perfect.
So let's talk more about it. Sorry to derail us a little bit, but I was just thinking.
No, you didn't. This is the group to throw out ideas to, because everybody has their own passion, but it all comes back toward ECE. So all ideas and thoughts are welcomed and absolutely encouraged. I see that it's 11:03. That time went super fast. But I also am very grateful for your time. I know how busy everyone is. I will work on cleaning this up and share it with Anna, and the both of us will put together, you know, an agenda that cleans this up a bit and gets us prepped for more specific and concise language for the next meeting. I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend, and
Mother's Day.
Yes, happy Mother's
Friday, Mother's Day.
Take care.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
Thank you very much.